3 nights ago, I broke down crying after visiting children at St. Jude's Hospital and screamed at God, "How can you watch babies suffer and do nothing?" What Jesus showed me about the true purpose of pain will change how you see every hardship you've ever faced. I'm still shaking from what he revealed. Before I share what happened that night, let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is. There's something powerful about knowing we're not alone in wrestling with life's deepest questions about pain and purpose. And if this message speaks to your heart, please consider subscribing. It gives me strength to share these vulnerable truths that I believe can bring healing to hurting hearts. I'm recording this from my hotel room in Memphis, where we just finished filming additional scenes for The Chosen. It's 3 a.m. and I should be exhausted, but I can't sleep because of what Jesus revealed to me about suffering. What I learned that night has completely transformed my understanding of why pain exists and how God sees our deepest wounds. Let me take you back to how this all began. 3 days ago, I visited St. Jude Children's Research Hospital here in Memphis. It was supposed to be a simple visit, meeting some young fans, maybe bringing a little encouragement to families going through unimaginable trials. I thought I was prepared. I thought my years of playing Jesus had equipped me to handle the emotional weight of being around suffering children. I was wrong. The moment I walked through those hospital doors, I was hit by a wall of sensory overload that nearly knocked me over. The antiseptic smell that can't quite mask the underlying odor of illness, the constant beeping and humming of medical equipment, the hushed conversations between doctors and worried parents, the sound of a child crying somewhere down the hall. But it was the children themselves that broke me. I met a 6-year-old girl named Emma who was receiving chemotherapy for leukemia. She had lost all her hair, and her tiny body was connected to more tubes and wires than seemed possible. But when she saw me, her face lit up with the most radiant smile I'd ever seen. She knew me from The Chosen, and she asked if I could pray with her. As I held her small hand, feeling how fragile and thin it was, she looked up at me with eyes that held more faith than I've seen in most adults and said, "Jesus, thank you for sending Jonathan to visit me today. Help me be brave like you were brave." I barely managed to finish that prayer without breaking down right there in front of her. Then there was 7-year-old Marcus, who was waiting for his second heart surgery. His parents looked like they hadn't slept in weeks, their eyes hollow with exhaustion and terror. But Marcus was excited to show me the picture he'd drawn of Jesus healing the sick. In his child's handwriting, he'd written at the bottom, "Jesus makes everything better." I spent 3 hours walking through those halls, meeting child after child whose courage humbled me and whose suffering left me speechless. There was the teenage girl who'd been fighting brain cancer for 2 years but still managed to crack jokes with the nurses. The 5-year-old boy who was learning to walk again after losing his leg to bone cancer, but greeted everyone with an infectious laugh. Each encounter chipped away at my composure until I felt like I was barely holding myself together. But it was my final visit that completely shattered me. I walked into a room where a baby, couldn't have been more than 18 months old, was lying in a hospital crib surrounded by machines. The child's parents were holding vigil beside the bed, their faces etched with a grief so profound it was almost unbearable to witness. The mother looked up at me with tear-stained cheeks and whispered, "Please pray for our daughter. The doctors say there's nothing more they can do." I stood there looking at this innocent baby, this perfect little person who had done nothing to deserve the disease ravaging her tiny body, and something inside me snapped. I managed to pray with the family, to offer what comfort I could, but inside I was screaming. The drive back to my hotel was a blur. I barely remember how I got to my room. The moment I closed the door behind me, the dam burst. I collapsed to my knees in the middle of that hotel room, and for the first time in my adult life, I didn't pray and I raged. "God," I shouted at the ceiling, not caring if anyone in the neighboring rooms could hear me. "How can you sit there and watch this? How can you see innocent babies suffering and do absolutely nothing?" The tears were pouring down my face now, months of suppressed questions and doubts flooding out all at once. That little girl, Emma, fighting for her life at 6 years old, where are you? That baby who might not live to see her second birthday. What did she ever do to deserve this? Those parents whose hearts are being ripped apart. How is this part of some loving plan? I was sobbing now, my whole body shaking with the force of my emotion. I've spent 6 years portraying you as love incarnate, talking about your compassion and mercy. And for what? So I can watch children suffer while you remain silent. So I can see the purest hearts breaking while you do nothing. The room felt oppressively quiet after my outburst. I stayed on my knees, feeling emptied out and more alone than I'd ever felt in my life. The questions that had been building in my heart for years were finally out in the open, hanging in the air like an accusation. That's when I heard it. Jonathan. The voice was soft, barely above a whisper, but it cut through the silence like a bell. I looked up, and there he was. Jesus was sitting in the chair by the window, wearing simple clothes, jeans, and a soft gray sweater. He looked exactly as I'd always imagined him, but more real, more present than any vision or dream. His eyes held an infinite depth of compassion, but not the kind that dismisses pain, the kind that fully acknowledges it. "You're angry," he said simply. It wasn't a question. "Yes, I'm angry." I shot back, surprised by my own boldness. "I'm furious. How can you watch children suffer and not intervene? Where's your power? Where's your love?" Jesus didn't flinch at my anger. Instead, he leaned forward, his expression growing even more gentle. "Your anger comes from love," he said. "You're angry because you care deeply about those children. You're angry because you can't bear to see innocence in pain. That anger is sacred, Jonathan. It's the same anger I felt when I saw the suffering in the world." He paused, letting that sink in. "But there's something you don't understand about suffering yet. Something that will change how you see everything. Are you willing to let me show you?" I wiped my eyes, feeling emotionally drained, but curious despite my pain. "Show me what?" "The truth about why suffering exists. Not the easy answers that people give to avoid the mystery, but the real truth that will heal your heart and help you understand. My heart." He stood up and extended his hand toward me. "But I have to warn you, what you're about to see will challenge everything you think you know about pain, about my role in it, and about why some of the purest souls endure the deepest trials." I hesitated for a moment, then reached out and took his hand. The moment our fingers touched, the hotel room dissolved around us, and we were standing back in the corridors of St. Jude's Hospital. But this time, everything was different. I could see things that had been invisible to me before. There were beings of light moving through the halls, some standing beside the beds of sick children, others surrounding the grieving parents. The whole place was saturated with a presence I hadn't been able to perceive with my natural eyes. "The first truth I want you to understand," Jesus said, his voice echoing softly in the transformed space, "is that suffering is not evidence of my absence. It's where I am most present." He led me to Emma's room, where I could now see a radiant figure standing beside her bed, hands gently resting on her small head. Every moment of pain, every tear shed, every prayer whispered in desperation. I am there, not as a distant observer, but as one who enters fully into the suffering. When Emma cries, I cry. When her parents' hearts break, my heart breaks. I watched as the being of light seemed to breathe peace into the little girl's restless sleep. "But why don't you just heal her?" I asked. "If you're there, if you care, why not end the suffering?" Jesus turned to face me, and I could see tears in his eyes. "That's the second truth," he said. "The purpose of innocent suffering is not to teach the innocent, it's to awaken the hearts of those who witness it." The scene around us shifted, and I could see the ripple effects of Emma's story spreading outward like waves on a pond. Nurses who had become more compassionate because of caring for her. Other families finding hope in her courage. Doctors rededicating themselves to finding cures. Strangers across the country donating money after hearing her story. "Emma's suffering is not meaningless," Jesus continued. "It's not a punishment or a random tragedy. Her courage in the face of pain is teaching an entire community what it means to trust, to hope, to love without reservation. Her parents' faithfulness is inspiring others to hold on to their faith in dark seasons." I was beginning to see something I'd never understood before. "The third truth," Jesus said, as we moved to Marcus's room, "is that suffering reveals love in its purest form." I watched as Marcus's parents took turns sleeping in the uncomfortable hospital chair, never leaving their son's side. I saw the way they looked at each other, their bond deepened by shared trial. I witnessed the tender moments between them and their son, every conversation precious because of its potential fragility. "Love that has never been tested by suffering remains surface level," Jesus explained, but love that endures through pain, that chooses faithfulness in the face of loss, that sacrifices comfort for presence, that love becomes unshakable. These parents are learning to love the way I love, without condition, without reservation, without counting the cost. We moved through the hospital, and Jesus continued revealing truths that were reshaping my entire understanding of pain. The fourth truth is that suffering without compassion teaches nothing, but compassion without suffering remains shallow. He showed me my own journey, the years before I'd experienced real loss or pain, when my empathy had been theoretical rather than experiential. Then he showed me how my own seasons of struggle had deepened my ability to connect with others in their pain. You couldn't have truly comforted those families today if you hadn't walked through your own valleys, he said. Your presence meant something to them because they could sense that you understood suffering, not just as a concept, but as a lived experience. The fifth truth hit me like a revelation. Every tear shed in love becomes a prayer that changes eternity. Jesus showed me something that took my breath away. A vast library of sorts, where every act of love performed in the midst of suffering was recorded like precious treasures. The mother's gentle touch on her sick child's forehead, the father's whispered promises to never give up hope, the nurse's extra moment of kindness, the stranger's donated dollar. Nothing done in love during times of suffering is ever wasted, Jesus said. Every act of compassion, every moment of faithfulness, every prayer offered through tears becomes part of the eternal story of redemption. We were moving toward the room with the baby now, and I felt my chest tighten with emotion again. The sixth truth, Jesus said, his voice becoming even more tender, is that some souls choose their earthly assignment specifically to awaken others to eternal realities. I stared at him, not understanding. You mean that baby chose to suffer? Not the suffering itself, he clarified, but the opportunity to serve in a way that only innocent suffering can serve. Some souls are so mature, so full of love, that they willingly take on the most difficult earthly assignments because they know the eternal impact their brief presence will have. He showed me a vision of that baby's soul, radiant, ancient in wisdom, surrounded by other beings of light who were honoring her courage in accepting such a challenging mission. Her parents will never be the same, Jesus continued. Their capacity for compassion will multiply 1,000-fold. They'll spend the rest of their lives helping other families navigate similar trials. The medical team caring for her will be changed by witnessing such pure innocence facing such profound challenges. Her story will ripple through generations. I was weeping again, but these were different tears, not just of sadness but of awe. The seventh truth, Jesus said, as we stood in that sacred space where the baby slept, is that no suffering in love is ever the final word. The room around us began to transform, and I found myself in the most beautiful garden I'd ever seen. The light here was different, warm and golden, full of life and joy. And there, running toward us with laughter that sounded like music, were children. But these weren't sick children. These were the same souls I'd met at the hospital, but now they were whole, radiant, free from pain. Emma ran up to me, her hair flowing behind her, her eyes bright with joy. Marcus was there too, his heart strong and perfect, and cradled in the arms of a being of pure light was the baby glowing with happiness. This is where every story of suffering ultimately leads, Jesus said. Not to loss, but to restoration. Not to endings, but to new beginnings that last forever. I watched as these children played and laughed, their earthly suffering transformed into crowns of light around their heads. Their pain was not the point, Jesus continued. Their love was the point. Their courage was the point. Their ability to inspire others to love more deeply was the point. And now they understand fully what their earthly journey accomplished. Emma ran over to me and took my hand. When she spoke, her voice carried wisdom far beyond her years. Jonathan, she said, tell everyone not to be sad for us. We're not victims of suffering. We're warriors of love. Every day we chose to smile through pain. Every moment we trusted God despite our circumstances. We were changing the world. We were teaching people what real faith looks like. Marcus joined us, grinning widely, and tell them that the doctors and nurses and parents and visitors who showed us love, they were serving God in the most beautiful way. They were his hands and feet and heart when we needed it most. The baby, now somehow able to communicate though she'd been too young to speak on earth, added her voice to theirs. My parents thought they were losing everything, but they were actually gaining everything. The love they gave me, the hope they held on to, the faith they chose despite their fear, that changed them forever. They'll spend eternity grateful for the opportunity to love so purely. I was overwhelmed by the profound wisdom coming from these young souls. Jesus put his hand on my shoulder. Do you understand now, Jonathan? Suffering is not the absence of my love. It's love's deepest expression. It's where people discover what they're truly capable of. It's where ordinary humans become extraordinary souls. We were back in my hotel room now, but I was forever changed by what I'd witnessed. But it still hurts, I said quietly. Even understanding the purpose, it still breaks my heart to see children in pain. Of course it does, Jesus replied, his voice full of compassion. And it should. That heartbreak is evidence that you're created in my image. I feel every moment of pain, every tear, every fear. The difference is that I can also see the end of the story, the restoration that awaits, the eternal purpose being served. He sat down beside me, and his presence brought such comfort. Your tears today were not a sign of weak faith, Jonathan. They were a sign of a heart that loves the way I love. Don't apologize for feeling deeply. Don't try to develop callousness towards suffering. Instead, let your compassion be a bridge between my heart and the hurting world. I thought about everything I'd seen, everything I'd learned. What do I do with all of this? I asked. You tell people what you've seen, Jesus said. You let them know that suffering is not evidence that I've abandoned them. You help them understand that their pain has purpose, their tears have meaning, their faithfulness in dark seasons is changing eternity. He stood up, and I knew our time together was coming to an end. And most importantly, he added, you help them see that suffering is not the end of anyone's story. It's a chapter, sometimes a long and difficult chapter, but it's never the final word. Love is always the final word. As Jesus began to fade from my sight, he left me with one last truth that I'll carry forever. Remember, Jonathan, I didn't come to earth to prevent all suffering. I came to enter into it, to transform it, and to ensure that no one suffers alone. Every person in pain has me beside them, sharing their burden, weeping with them, and preparing a restoration beyond their wildest imagination. And then he was gone, leaving me alone in my hotel room, but not really alone at all. I spent the rest of that night in prayer and reflection, processing everything I'd witnessed. The questions that had tormented me for years weren't just answered, they were transformed. I no longer saw suffering as evidence of God's absence, but as proof of his presence. I no longer viewed pain as meaningless, but as mysteriously meaningful. The next morning I returned to St. Jude's Hospital, but this time I went with different eyes. I could still see the suffering, but I could also see the love that suffering was revealing. I watched parents discover strength they never knew they had. I witnessed medical staff who chose to see their work as a sacred calling. I observed how the courage of sick children inspired everyone around them to live with more gratitude, more purpose, more love. I spent extra time with Emma, and when she asked me to pray with her again, I prayed differently. Instead of asking God to take away her suffering, I prayed for strength to walk through it with grace. Instead of questioning why she had to endure such trials, I thanked God for the privilege of witnessing her incredible faith. When her mother walked me to the elevator afterward, she took my hand and said something I'll never forget. Thank you for not trying to give us easy answers about why this is happening. Thank you for just sitting with us in it. That means more than you know. That's when I realized that my own journey through questions and doubt had prepared me to offer something more valuable than religious platitudes. I could offer presence, understanding, and authentic hope. This message isn't just for me, it's for everyone watching who has ever looked at suffering, their own or someone else's, and wondered where God is in the pain. If you're watching this while walking through your own valley of suffering, I want you to know that you are not alone. The God who created you is not distant or uncaring. He is right there with you, sharing your burden, catching your tears, and working to bring beauty from ashes. If you're watching this while watching someone you love suffer, know that your presence, your faithfulness, your refusal to abandon them in their pain is one of the ways God shows up in their darkest hour. You are his hands and feet and heart in their world. And if you're watching this while struggling with questions about why a loving God allows suffering, know that your questions don't disqualify you from faith. They're evidence of a heart that cares deeply about justice and love. God can handle your questions, your doubts, even your anger. He's big enough for all of it. The truth Jesus showed me is this: suffering is not the opposite of God's love. It's where God's love shines brightest. It's in the darkest valleys that we discover what we're truly capable of. It's in our deepest pain that we learn to love most purely. It's in our greatest trials that we find our greatest purpose. Your suffering has meaning, your pain has purpose, your tears are precious, and your story, whatever chapter you're in right now, is not over. The God who entered into suffering to redeem it is writing an ending more beautiful than you can imagine. Father God, I lift up every person watching who is walking through suffering right now. Whether it's physical pain, emotional heartbreak, loss of a loved one, or watching someone they love endure trials, meet them in their pain. Help them to feel your presence in their darkest moments. Give them strength for today and hope for tomorrow. Surround them with people who will sit with them in their suffering without trying to fix or explain it away. For those who are caring for suffering loved ones, multiply their strength and deepen their compassion. Help them to see their service as sacred, their presence as precious, their faithfulness as a reflection of your love. And for those who are struggling with questions about suffering, thank you for hearts that care enough to ask hard questions. Meet them in their doubt with your truth, in their anger with your understanding, and in their confusion with your peace. Help all of us to remember that suffering is not evidence of your absence but proof of your presence. You don't stand distant from our pain, you enter into it, you share it, you transform it, and you use it to reveal love in its purest form. Give us eyes to see the eternal purpose in our temporary trials, and hearts that trust your goodness even when we can't understand your ways. In Jesus' name, amen. The truth that changed my life is this: God doesn't allow suffering because he doesn't care. He allows it because he cares so deeply that he's willing to enter into it with us, to use it to reveal the depths of love possible in human hearts, and to transform every tear into something eternally beautiful. You are loved beyond measure, even in your pain, especially in your pain. Your suffering has not been wasted. Your faithfulness in darkness is changing eternity, and your story of redemption is still being written.